Good morning, students. Welcome back to a class on Shakespeare. In the previous class, we looked into the introduction of Shakespeare. We saw about his birth, his early life, and his works. Today, let us discuss one of the sonnets written by Shakespeare. As I told you, sonnet is a 14-line poem. Shakespeare has written 154 sonnets in his lifetime. So sonnet 12 is the sonnet that we are going to discuss in class today. It is a part of the prolonged fair youth sequence of sonnets that lasts from sonnet 1 through sonnet 126. These 126 sonnets are divided into small sequences. This particular poem is in the group known as procreation sonnets. It is directed towards the fair youth, who is the intended listener and the subject of the vast majority of Shakespearean sonnets. He is encouraged throughout the sonnet 1 through 17 to have children. Sonnet 12 by William Shakespeare. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, when I behold the violet past prime, and sable curls, all silvered o'er with white, when lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd, and summer's green all girded up in sheaves, borne on the bier with white and bristly beard, then of thy beauty do I question make, that thou among the wastes of time must go, since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake, and die as fast as they see others grow, and nothing against time's seat can make defense, save breathe to brave him when he takes thee hence. This is the poem. Now let us analyze the poem. The speaker goes through images of dying trees, flowers, old men, and the setting of the sun in order to get to his points across to the fair youth. It is a terrible thing to grow old and die, and he is trying to help the young man as it is. As much for his sake as for the world's, the only way that he can be sure that his youth will last forever if he has a child. Now coming to the structure of the poem, it is a traditional 14-line sonnet. The poem is structured in the form that has come to be synonymous with the poet's name. It is made up of 3 quatrains or sets of 4 lines and one concluding couplet or a set of 2 rhyming lines. The poet follows a consistent rhyme scheme that conforms to the pattern of AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, JG, and it is written in iambic pentameter. This means that each line contains 5 sets of 2 beats, known as metrical feet. The first is unstressed and the second is stressed. It sounds something like da-dum, da-dum. As is common in Shakespeare poems, the last 2 lines are a rhyming pair, known as a couplet. They often bring with them a turn or alter in the poem. They are sometimes used to answer a question posed in the previous 12 lines, or shift the perspective, or even change the speakers. In the case of Sonnet 12, Shakespeare is questioning the youth's beauties. The poetic devices used in this sonnet are alliteration, imagery, and metaphor. Imagery is one of the most important techniques here. It refers to the elements of a poem that engage a reader's senses. Traditionally, the word image is related to visual sights, things that a reader can imagine seeing. But the imagery is much more than that. It is something one can sense with their 5 senses. For example, the image of the dark hair turning grey and white, or of the old man being carried on in his funeral bier. Alliteration occurs when words are used in succession or at least appear close together and begin with the same sound. For example, tells and time in the first line and fast and prime in the third. As you all know, a metaphor is a comparison between two unlike things that does not use like or as it is also present in the text. When using this technique, a poet is saying that one thing is another thing. They aren't just similar. The first 8 lines of this poem are a comparison between the youth's eventual aging and the general cycle of life in the larger world. Now look at the detailed analysis. Taking the first 4 lines in the first quatrain, 4 lines is called as a quatrain. The poet begins with the first in a series of metaphors that compares the fair youth's beauty to something natural and sublime, but also temporary. The speaker is thinking of the way that the day gives way to night, the graying of black hair, and the dying of flowers. He imagines the violet, past prime, a good example of alliteration, and sees the fair youth's complexion wrinkling, his body giving out, and everyone forgetting about him. The day that was once brave becomes hideous, means it is dying, and the sable black curls turn silver and white. None of these things are preferable. So here, the poet is trying to say that everything is undergoing change and decay eventually. As time passes, everything is undergoing a change and everything is impermanent and it is getting older just to die off one day. Coming to the next 4 lines, the speaker continues the series of metaphors used to describe the fair youth in the future. He thinks about the trees, which at this point in their prime are barren of leaves. The speaker also imagines the herds down below stuck out in the heat for the loss of that shade. Here the imagination is that the tree was full of leaves and branches where the travelers can go and sit and get some shelter, get some shade. But after a while, in autumn, the leaves are all falling down and the tree is barren, which is again a metaphor to our decaying age. How a human, is slowly decaying in age and he becomes weaker and weaker. The summer will be stripped of its beauty and its worth, just as crops are tied up and taken in sheaves to the barn. So, like how you harvest the sheaves and all, they are taken to the barn. So that is the metaphor used here. The last image in this quatrain is that of an old man borne on a bier, means he is being carried on in his grave. None of these images are at all uplifting and they are not meant to be. They are just meant to make us understand that everything is fleeting in life. Everything is ephemeral. Our life is not eternal. The speaker is hoping to shock the fair youth into considering his future seriously. In the third and the final quatrain of Sonnet 12, the speaker finally gets around to directly addressing the youth. When he sees all the things listed in the last 8 lines, he questions the youth's beauty. He knows it can't last forever. He will also have to deal with the wastes of time. Unfortunately, all sweet and beautiful creatures, however sweet and beautiful they may be, eventually lose themselves to time. They do themselves forsake. It is in their wake that others grow. So he is encouraging the youth to produce children, to give birth to young ones. The couplet that concludes the poem gets around to the speaker's main point that there is nothing the youth can do except to have children to fight off time. Continuing one's life through another is the only way to get immortality and outwit time. Because as humans die, their offsprings will live, and thus they create generations which will still live after them. So I think the analysis was clear. We will have a round of discussion in the next class. Thank you, girls.